The sign of the rat, the 3 bars crossed, the cursed triangle. Know it well, for the SKAVEN can't go anywhere without marking it on the walls. You spot it, you know they're there, and they're proud of it too. They aren't quite so monstrous as to not rally to their banners, nor to rage when they're torn down. Break them or burn them, and you break their spirit and send them packing. The Horned Rat, also known as the Lord of the World Below and the Underfather, is the supreme god of the SKAVEN, and he brooks no other gods before him. Though not affiliated with the Chaos Gods, the Horned Rat is almost certainly a distant relative of those foul, nebulous beings. He represents all things the SKAVEN are, or wish to be, undying and eternally scheming. This cunning deity patiently awaits the day of the great ascendancy, when his children will swarm across the face of the world, devouring it from within. Entropy is his mantra. Decay is his stock in trade. All things must rot, figuratively or literally, and the Horned Rat and his offspring are the worldly reality of this simple truth. He is infinitely patient, an insidious evil that gnaws on the edges of reality since the earliest times. All SKAVEN revere the Horned Rat. None question his existence. Such respect is a product of fear, for the Horned Rat's eternal hunger does not discriminate between his vermin children and the dwellers of the surface world. A devout SKAVEN utters small prayers to the Horned God throughout the day, each prayer being a verbal slice of hate, envy, or malice. These prayers are answered often enough to give the Horned Rat validity in the minds of his adherents, even in cases when divine intervention is obviously not involved. Blood sacrifice is common in the day-to-day worship of the Horned Rat. The SKAVEN fear that if his appetite is not satisfied, he will devour them instead. The form of the sacrifice, a slave, SKAVEN or otherwise, is not as important as the sacrifice itself. There is no specific doctrine that governs who or what must be sacrificed. The sacrifice itself is enough to sate the Lord of Decay for a brief time. Young victims are considered to be the most potent sacrifices for him, while the blood of the aged and infirm is less desirable. The number of sacrifices made to the Horned Rat by his followers varies considerably, depending upon their need. In times of war, the number of daily blood sacrifices can be staggering, sometimes numbering in the thousands in the great SKAVEN cities of SKAVEN Blights or Hell Pits. The SKAVEN also increase the number of daily sacrifices if they fail to secure victory in battle, or suffer some other embarrassing setback. The Grey Seers preach that victory cannot be won if the Horned Rat is unsatisfied with his minions, and thus any defeat or failure is a sign that he must be appeased. Religious services are constantly held by the Grey Seers in honor of their sinister god. All SKAVEN are expected to be present at a mass at least once a day, even though no formal records of attendance are kept. Those who do not attend services open themselves up to all manner of criticism, including accusations of heresy, treason, and atheism. Influential SKAVEN warlords contract their own spiritual advisors from the ranks of the Grey Seers, and these priests for hire give private services to their employers and their households. The Horned Rat has 13 secret names only known to the Grey Seers. A Vermin Lord is the supreme manifestation of the SKAVEN sole demonic deity, the Horned Rat. These demons are by far the strongest and most fearsome the Under Empire has ever known. The Vermin Lords are thought to be the demonic forms of ancient SKAVEN, particularly Lords of Decay, warped by the influence of the Horned Rat into his immortal servants. A Vermin Lord is at once majestic and disgusting, a living icon of ruin, the ultimate scavenger. Although such a being towers in height, it is lithe and quick, its movements evoking the fluid yet twitchy scuttling of rats. Their heads are bedecked with the spiraling horns and sloughing flesh of the Horned Rat himself. Warpstone amulets and tomes decorate the Vermin Lord's leprous form, along with chunks of raw warpstone hammered into their flesh. They are often seen armed with huge, wicked-looking glaives that are fully twice the height of a man, but their chiseled teeth and sharp claws are easily capable of tearing a creature to pieces. Any onlooker finds that he cannot look away from the nightmarish creature, yet at the same time fervently hopes not to make eye contact. And this is wise, for even the passing attention of such an ancient and wicked being is enough to stop a man's heart. Few dare to meet a Vermin Lord's all-seeing gaze for even an instant, and none can hold it. A Vermin Lord is eternally calculating, a myriad of interweaving plots, ever seeking the best path towards some desired end. The creature is never still, constantly pacing, stopping to tilt its head as if sniffing for the future. When the time for action comes, however, the Vermin Lord manifests all the feral savagery of the SKAVEN race. Its rage is terrifying to behold, and few mortals can stand against it. Their sinuous body contains the might and strength to challenge a greater demon, and lesser creatures are swept aside in droves. At need, they can summon a powerful and wicked glaive, which they swing in deadly and unstoppable arcs. And now, onto the Vermin Lord types. The first type, the Vermin Lord Deceivers. Perhaps the least seen of all the Vermin Lords are the Deceivers, the Lords of Assassin, the shadows that kill. This is as they prefer it. It is not their way to barge about upon a battlefield like some clumsy warlord. Instead, their power lies in stealth. They move in clouds of shadow, obfuscating even those around them. Only when their intrigues are ripe will a Vermin Lord Deceiver step out of the darkness to strike. Out of nowhere they appear, moving with blurring swiftness. Into their uplifted hands they summon forth triple-bladed throwing stars. With a snap of the wrist, the Vermin Lord can fling the killing star, sending it to scythe down foes in a great circling arc. The flash of its passing can be seen, leaving decapitated victims and slicing off limbs in its wake. At the end of its circuitous flight, the Vermin Lord Deceiver will snatch it out of midair and throw it again in quick succession. Such is their agility, and their ability to rapidly displace themselves, that the creatures can even throw their weapons and catch them from some completely different part of the battlefield. In close combat, they favor the warp stiletto, a stabbing weapon the length of a man. Its deeply acuminated shape allows the blade to penetrate deep into a foe, where its toxic nature can do the most damage with great efficiency. Whilst common soldiers might batter each other ceaselessly with only a swift thrust from the warp stiletto, a deceiver can fell any foe, no matter how large. And next, the second type, the Vermin Lord Corruptors, also known as the Pestilent Reapers and the Colors of Civilization. Vermin Lord Corruptors are disease-given form. They are surrounded by an aura of creeping sickness, and all around them, life withers away. The spread of plague is their craft, and at their command are the worst maladies in the world. With but a malicious glance, a Vermin Lord Corruptor can cause foes to break out into the rot eye pox, the oozing twitch, or the black plague. There are none more malignant nor more uncompromising than these infested terrors. Of all the Vermin Lords, the Corruptors have severely decayed and consequently the least elaborate hordes, though simply mentioning this to one of these repulsive rat demons is certain to begin a vendetta that will last an eternity. Although not above a degree of skulking, Corruptors are more likely than any other Vermin Lords to be at the forefront of battle. They are zealots who incite extreme hate in others, proving especially effective in goading plague monks into an extreme frenzy. More sorcerous than most of their kin, the corruptors can call down plague storms, shrivel skin, or vomit forth impossible gauges of noxious poisons. Should any foe live long enough to close in with a vermin lord corruptor, their battle has only just begun. Living upon the greasy pelt of a corruptor can be any number of tiny parasites, sting fleas, or three-eyed mites. They bite all who approach and infect their prey with bubonics, the flesh-bubbling disease that rots foes in minutes. As the foes reel, the Vermin Lord Corruptor will then summon forth a pair of Plague Reapers, sickle-like blades which it will use to eviscerate its enemies with a savage fury. And next, the third type, the Vermin Lord Warbringers, also known as Tyrants of Battle, and the Great Stabber Slicers. The Vermin Lord Warbringers are the most commonly seen of the rat demons, and of all the Vermin Lords, none are so full of themselves and self-posturing. They have a fondness for dramatic entrances, such as arriving in clouds of smoke before mustering hordes of SKAVEN. They stride battle lines, towering over the rat men who cower in the presence of such majestic and terrible beings. Whenever possible, they strike heroic poses, with their sinuously curving horns thrust regally outwards, and their weapons glinting in the fires of battle. All of this preening is not merely pretentiousness on the part of these vermin lords, however. SKAVEN, particularly clan rats and storm vermin, rally to the awe-inspiring sight of these godly creatures. Thus can the presence of such a vermin lord steady even the most craven force. With each colossal stride of dramatic whip of the tail, the chittering tumult rising from the fighting hordes increases in its intensity. SKAVEN, who bask in that verminous presence for long enough, will be overcome by a bloodthirsty, teeth-snapping rage that they long to unleash upon the foe. The Warbringers are not zealous about leading from the front. They far prefer to stride amongst a seething tide of rat men, for they draw strength from being amongst their mortal underlings. When they reach the front line, few mortal creatures can match their speed or strength, and they are able to cut down whole ranks at a time with great sweeps from their doom glaives. When facing larger enemies, or delivering a dramatic coup de grace, a Warbringer will manifest an enormous spike fist, driving it through the foe and tearing out its entrails for all to see. And next, the fourth type, the Vermin Lord Warpseers, also known as the Lords of Black Lightning and the Great Manipulators. The Vermin Lord Warpseers are the most inscrutable of all the rat demons. Great leaders and visionaries, they are often found at the center of the most complex of plots. All Vermin Lords are manipulative, but the Warpseers bring beguilement to new levels. Every syllable whispered, and every subtle nuance has been crafted to influence an end game that it alone can fathom. When a Vermin Lord Warper arrives in the world, it does so not with a plan, but with dozens, even hundreds of plots and intrigues. And it is not through words and schemes alone that a Vermin Lord Warp Seer will work its wild. When it comes to the arcane arts, the Warp Seers wield great power. All Vermin Lords can hurl black lightning, but when a Warp Seer does so, it is not alone bolts they cast, but vast, arcing chains of destruction. With a stomp of their clawed foot, they can open rifts, crack foundations, and topple the structures of the so-called civilized world. At their command, the vermin of the world swarm, forming tidal waves of rats. So powerful is their call that rodent kind from the Shadow Realms join the pack, and nothing can stop their chiseled teeth, for they are able to gnaw a soul from a body in seconds. They alone can summon forth a scry orb of enormous proportions. This sphere can be used to gaze into all possible futures, allowing the Vermin Lord to know the unknowable and see that which is beyond sight. A powerful boon as they plot the fall of their enemies and the fate of their allies. At times of great need, the Vermin Lord Warp Seer can hurl this swirling orb as a weapon, its destruction releasing a miasma of multiple futures and fumes of purest warpstone. Those caught within the blast are driven mad, reduced to utter feeble-mindedness by the nightmare visions they are gifted. And at last, onto the final type, the Exalted Vermin Lords. Recently come into my possession is a scroll purported to summon and command an Exalted Master of the Endless Host. I purchased the document from my contact in the Tourmaline Fellowship, who claimed to have acquired it from some Diestro recently returned from Talia, who claimed to have retrieved it himself from a ruined city swallowed by an enormous swamp. Old Hildegard tried to impress me with some gibberish about rats that walk like men, but I am no mere dabbler in the forbidden to be taken in by such mythical nonsense. Perhaps this creature is some kind of demon, fancifully named by an errant scholar. Yet according to the accompanying notes, the creature is lithe and possessed of horrifying vigor. This sounds unlike any demon I have yet encountered. It is an intriguing but easily solved mystery. It will take perhaps a day to set wars which will contain any demon born of the powers of chaos, and then we shall see exactly what this creature may be and what secrets I can wrest from it. The final pages of Maximilian von Wudich's journal, discovered in his blood-soaked mansion by witch hunters of the Order of Sigmar's Wrath. The Vermin Lords are the arch-demons of the SKAVEN god, the Horned Rat, and embody all that is foul and cruel in that misbegotten race of rat men. At once mighty and vile, cunning and savage, they are creatures of creeping decay and lightning-fast fury. They are ruin made manifest, huge yet lithe. Vermin lords are horrific creatures to behold, somewhere in form between plague rat, human, and demon beast. No two are quite identical, but each is marked with the signs of rank and potency in the horned rat's service, with great spiraling horns crowning their heads and black burning blades and glaives clutched in their grasp. Even the lesser amongst their kind are beings of great power, malevolent intelligence, and incalculable malice. And for one to be summoned to the world of mortals is a dire matter that no grey seer engages into lightly and without fear. For a vermin lord is no brute beast to be controlled, but a being with its own agenda, and is wiser and more treacherous than any living SKAVEN could ever hope to be. But even within the ranks of such impossibly powerful entities, there are those whose dark majesty exceeds that of their brethren. These so-called exalted vermin lords may only ever be summoned across the veil of realities in times of great slaughter, suffering, and death. And when the winds of magic howl in tempest, even more dangerous and intractable than their nightmare kin, they demand the death not of mere sacrifices or the carrion of the battlefield as their due, but rather the destruction of entire cities and the ruination of nations for their pleasure before their power is wedded to any cause, even that of the great lords of decay. Being a corporeal manifestation of the malignity of the horned rat, all of the exalted vermin lord's attacks are magical. He wields a dire glaive and can unleash a cascade of withering green flame that corrodes metal and blisters flesh. Screech, Vermin King, known also as the Rat King, is the legendary head of the Shadow Council of 13, and the greatest vermin lord of all time. Among the children of the Horned Rat, his was a legend that one day the 13-headed one would rise. It was said that this Rat King would usher in a new era, bringing closer the day when the great Horned One would come forth and the entire world would be made into a nest lair of ruination. His tale began long ago, in a different age of the world. The nascent race of SKAVEN had only recently discovered a huge warpstone meteor interred in the sundered mountain called Cripple Peak. It was then, and remains to this day, the largest deposit of that coveted substance yet found. The SKAVEN, however, were not the first to lay claim to it. Cripple Peak was the domain of the father of necromancers, the great Nagash. He had turned the mountain into an undead stronghold, and his shambling minions mined deep underground, extracting the warpstone for some fell purpose of the necromancer. So it was that the SKAVEN made war, bursting into the lower mines of Nagashizar, or the Cursed Pit as the Rat Men came to know it. An endless battle of attrition began, with the SKAVEN pitting their vast numbers against a foe that could never be slain. The war stretched into years, then into decades. The Council of 13 craved the limitless power offered by the Warpstone, but no matter how many warriors they ordered into the conflict, they could not break the stalemate. For his part, the great necromancer could find no way to drive off the SKAVEN that infested the tunnels under the mountain, and so was unable to bring his own dark plans to fruition. In the end, Nagash offered an unholy pact with the Council of 13. In return for peace, the great necromancer would supply the SKAVEN with warpstone mined below Cripple Peak. After much deliberation, the council agreed and Claw marked the pact. In truth, the council desired all of the warpstone, yet even their reserves were finite. This compromise at least offered some return. Nagash soon set rotting emissaries to the Council of 13. He offered more warpstone if the SKAVEN would lure green-skinned tribes into the Cursed Pit. The council agreed, but also redoubled their number of spies, as they were intrigued about what their foe was plotting. At first, there was little to report. However, it soon became obvious that powerful magic was at work. Storm clouds of energy revealed a spell that would reshape the world itself. The Council of 13 hastily convened, for Nagash's great ritual was underway. Through their scrying orb, the SKAVEN saw what they feared. Far to the south, an innumerable legion of undead was flowing north like a river of bone. Millions of restless dead strode relentlessly towards Nagashizar in perhaps the mightiest army the world had ever seen. Before that host, the living would be snuffed out like a candle's flame in a black whirlwind. For the first time, the Council of 13 voted unanimously. They had to stop Nagash. Unsure if their weapons could harm a being of such stature, one of the council suggested a blade of purest warpstone be forged, and he oversaw that work. And so it went, with each member contributing to the task at hand. Finally, at last, council members sent spies via secret tunnels to deliver the fell blade into the hands of an unwitting pawn. The plan worked, but only barely. Nagash was cut into 1,000 pieces. Even in defeat, the great necromancer had lashed out at his foe. Far away in Skavenblight, the Council of 13 was struck with the arcane feedback of that spell. It was so potent that 2 of the Lords of Decay had dropped dead, blood spraying from their eyes and ears. Yet it was over. The most powerful necromancer the world had ever known was stopped. the SKAVEN scurried to collect the pieces of Nagash, taking them to the warp forges to destroy them. Without his great will, Nagash's legions were no more than bones in the desert. The SKAVEN grew strong and proliferated. Deep they tunneled under the world's edge mountains, establishing many lair nests. In Nagash's absence, the SKAVEN had been poised to claim swaths of the surface world, and the Horned Rat was pleased. Yet his pride soon turned to wrath, as petty rivalries and internal strife bled all momentum from the SKAVEN's progress. In anger, the SKAVEN deity plucked up each of the Lords of Decay, placing them in a dark hole within his realm. There, they were rejoined with the members of their council who had been killed by Nagash's spell. For the Horned Rat had debated how to reward these supplicants. How long the Lords of Decay remain in that pit was unknown, for time passes strangely in all the corners of that shadowy limbo. In that hellish pit, there was nothing to sustain the fallen Lords of Decay except the scraps of failed plots thrown to them by the Horned Rat. So, day after day, year after year, the disgraced Lords of Decay could do nothing but gnaw upon missed opportunities, point claws at one another, and bicker. In the end, the Horned Rat relented. Besides, he was fond of his children, flaws and all, and since then, no single council had surpassed the deeds of that banished group. With an enormous claw, the Horned Rat drew forth his errant congregants. What emerged from out of that pit, however, was not 12 Lords of Decay, but a single entity. A hideous amalgamation of the entire Council of 13. Twisted and tail-locked, they were now one squirming creature. The Horned Rat looked over the creature he had wrought and deemed it would not quite do. With a searing bolt of black lightning, the Rat God formed the twisted shape into a form more pleasing to him, that of a vermin lord, and with a final, vomitous belch, he anointed it with a portion of his own godly power. Horns still sprouting and twisting, the Vermin Lord rose from this baptism of filth, and thus was Screech Vermin King born. Vermin King was a Vermin Lord like no other. He incorporated within his being the stealth of Clan Eshin, the arcane talent of the Grey Seers, the technological insight of Clan Skra, the flesh-crafting skills of Clan Molder, and the warrior ambition of the Warlord clans. Although Clan Pestilence had not yet been formed at the time of Nagash's fall, the forebears of their founders were upon that Council of 13, and they too now resided within Screech's twisted body. In this manner, Vermin King bore great knowledge of disease, along with a burning zeal to spread that corruption in the name of the Horned Rat. At long last, after so much time in the Black Pit, Vermin King was free. He glared into the mortal realm, scratching at the ever-thinning walls that separated the shadowy realm of ruin from the world of mortals. The Order of the Grey Seers, known officially as the Priesthood of the Horned Rat, is the main religious organization of the Under Empire, and whose members are known as the Grey Seers, prophets of ruin and destruction. This religious order consists of a maximum of 169 official Grey Seer members. Their leader, the Venerable Sea Lord Kritislik, being the most important member of the priesthood, as well as the Council of 13. As such, these prophets act as ambassadors, envoys, intermediaries, and priests for the Horned Rat and the Council of 13 on matters concerning their entire race. These twin roles mean that the Grey Seers wield tremendous influence in the Under Empire. Grey Seers possess a rank and position greater than all other SKAVEN, barring the Lords of Decay themselves. As such, the Grey Seers guard their power jealously, and it is a foolish warlord indeed who does not immediately prostrate themselves at the feet of a Grey Seer and humbly acquiesce. The entire purpose of the priesthood is to abide the wishes of the Horned Rat, which is to bring about the Great Ascendancy by unifying the warring clans together and swarm the surface of the world in a seething tide. All SKAVEN revere the Horned Rat. None question his existence. Such respect is a product of fear, for the Horned Rat's eternal hunger does not discriminate between his vermin children and the dwellers of the surface world. A devout SKAVEN utters small prayers to the Horned God throughout the day, each prayer being a verbal slice of hate, envy, or malice. These prayers are answered often enough to give the Horned Rat validity in the minds of his adherents, even in cases when divine intervention is obviously not involved. Blood sacrifice is common in the day-to-day worship of the Horned Rat. The SKAVEN fear that if the Horned Rat's appetite is not satisfied, he will devour his children instead. The form of the sacrifice, a slave, SKAVEN or otherwise, is not as important as the sacrifice itself. There is no specific doctrine that governs who or what must be sacrificed. The sacrifice itself is enough to sate the Lord of Decay for a brief time. Young victims are considered to be the most potent sacrifices for him, while the blood of the aged and infirm is less desirable. The number of sacrifices made to him by his followers varies considerably depending upon their need. In times of war, the number of daily blood sacrifices can be staggering, sometimes numbering in the thousands in the great SKAVEN cities of Skavenblight or Hell Pit. The SKAVEN also increase the number of daily sacrifices if they fail to secure victory in battle or suffer some other embarrassing setback. The Grey Seers preach that victory cannot be won if the Horned Rat is unsatisfied with his minions, and thus any defeat or failure is a sign that he must be appeased. Religious services are constantly held by the Grey Seers in honor of their sinister god. All SKAVEN are expected to be present at a mass at least once a day, even though no formal records of attendance are kept. Those who do not attend services open themselves up to all manner of criticism, including accusations of heresy, treason, and atheism. Influential SKAVEN warlords contract their own spiritual advisors from the ranks of the Grey Seers, and these priests for hire give private services to their employers and their households. No ordinary SKAVEN can become one of the Horned Rat's chosen. These SKAVEN are chosen at birth for their sacred duty, each being marked by grey or white fur. Most disturbingly, each Grey Seer is born with two small bony nubs upon his head, which eventually grow into twisting horns. The horns set the Grey Seers apart from the rest of their kin. The birth of a Grey Seer is a rare and auspicious occasion. An infant so blessed is immediately carried off to be raised in seclusion by his kind. Such an apprenticeship is a long and dangerous course, and most Grey Seer juveniles do not survive the ordeal. They must not only suffer dangerous training and religious indoctrination, but they are also set one against the other, much as their mundane birthkin are. The stakes are indeed high, and the Horned Rat rewards those Grey Seers who are resourceful enough to carve their place within his priesthood's hierarchy. Magical and sorcerous training are paramount to a Grey Seer's vocation. Each is an accomplished wizard with access to destructive spells and terrifying powers. Such arcane ability is attributed to the Seer's connection to his god, but the energies that power such spells are drawn from the Seer himself. These powers do not originate with the Horned Rat. Instead, the Horned Rat gifts his unholy children with an enhanced ability to manifest such magic. Once they have completed their apprenticeships and proven their ability to survive the cutthroat tactics of their brethren, young Grey Seers are allowed to administer their dark religion to the teeming SKAVEN hordes of the Under Empire. They are expected to provide religious counsel to all of the Horned Rat's offspring, interpret signs and omens, and craft some manner of unity between the assorted clans. Their methods are varied, and their motives are often impure. Like other SKAVEN, the less pious Grey Seers are often more interested in their individual successes rather than the triumphs of their race as a whole. The mere mention of their god aids the Grey Seers in mastering the politics of the Under Empire. No clan dares to oppose them, lest they be declared heretics and be hunted down by the rest of their species. The oblique threat of being dubbed a heretic by a Grey Seer brings even the most rebellious Skaven back into line. Seers that oppose one another rarely engage in direct conflict. Instead, they use the Horned Rat's worshippers as pawns in a devious chess game that can last for decades. They define status within their organization through a combination of accomplishment and seniority. As they tend to be longer lived than typical Skaven, age plays a substantial role in determining a seer's standing within his religious order. At the pinnacle of this ever-changing pyramid, just below the Horned Rat himself, stands the Seer Lord. The Seer Lord is an enigmatic figure, the supreme religious leader of all Skaven. His ties to the Council of 13 are strong. Indeed, it is rumored one of the seats on the council belongs to the Seer Lord himself. There are many temples and holy sites dedicated to the Horned Rat. These can vary from simple shrines to monumental churches topped with a large bell tower. Being of holy significance to both the Under Empire and the priesthood, these sites are near untouchable to any Skaven. Often, these structures are the greatest infrastructure within the entire settlement it is located within, for only the larger of these boroughs are wealthy enough to provide the enormous upkeep of such a religious temple. The heart of the Skaven religion and the priesthood is located within the capital city of Skavenblight. This great bell tower cathedral is the site of the Horned Rat's temple and the place of the Horned Rat's incarnation. Once past the white albino council guards that watch over the temple, one would enter the decaying edifices. Rats scamper along the floor, hidden beneath the foul, marshy fog. Inside are abandoned, rotting chapels, obscene and dark altars to the Horned Rat, and great vaulted chambers that are the site of horrible services and devotion to their vile god. At the center of the ground floor of the temple is a blackened and baroque winding stairway that climbs up into the benighted cathedral ceiling, eventually reaching the bell tower where the unholy artifact rings, tolling each victory won by Skavendom. Beyond the stairways is a massive room, the sanctum of the Horned Rat. It is here where their god shall appear to his subjects that seek his guidance. The room has one main entrance through a massive archway with 12 smaller entrances. The 12 smaller entrances lead to silent corridors where the Grey Seers study their dark arts. The sanctum itself is a massive room, the largest within the temple itself. The entire floor of the circular chamber is a massive symbol to the Horned Rat. At the end of the room, on a massive dais, is a giant altar and pulpit. On the pulpit is a massive book bound in brass and iron, and spread across the altar is a cloth bearing the symbol of the Horned Rat. Sunk into its surface is a massive brass bowl, covered in runes, obscured by the drinking, flaking blood. Behind the dais, on a raised level, is a massive pillar of warp stone called the Pillar of Commandments. The pillar glows with unearthly inner light that seems to blur everything around it. This huge pillar has 13 sides, each side intricately inscribed with spidery runes. This artifact was a personal gift by the Horned Rat himself, intended for those who seek to be a Lord of Decay, by touching it and being crowned worthy of his holy favor. Kritislik, known by many other titles such as Grand Grey Seer of all Skavendom, Ipsissimus of the entire Order of Grey Seers, Keeper of the Temple and the Faith of the Temple, Lord Exalted of the Shattered Tower, Ringmaster of the Black Bell, First Member of the Council of 13, Voice of the Horned Rat, or simply the Seer Lord of the Priesthood, is the current religious head of the Order of the Grey Seers and a member of the Council of 13. He is an ancient and powerful being within Skaven society, a Skaven who has lived for nigh thousands of years and has ever held the greatest seat within the Council of 13. Indeed, it is said that unlike other Skaven who put themselves above even their own god, the piety of Kritislik is legendary, for he is the only Skaven who would put himself second only to the wishes and demands of the father of the Skaven race. Such devotion also ensures that Kritislik has not one, but two votes within the council hierarchy. Very little is known about Kritislik, yet such mystery only aids in inflating the massive aura of power which clings to the greatest of the Horned Rat's chosen emissaries. What little is known about Kritislik was that he was Seer Lord since the time of the Great War against Chaos. It was during the war that Clan Skryre re-established their main stronghold within the confines of Skavenblight. In time, Clan Skryre assembled a mighty force of infernal devices and engines of destruction on a scale never before seen. It was with this gathering of newly developed apparatus that Chief Warlock Ikid Claw detected a strange rising of dark magical energies emanating from the far north. Dark omens abounded throughout the world as Moor's Leap, the Chaos Moon, hung low towards the earth, and showers of warpstone meteorites rained from the skies. Dark energies swept once more from the north as the largest Chaos army ever assembled at that age and time gathered for the great slaughter that would engulf the lands of the Empire. Known to only a few within the Under-Empire, a great event was coming, and only Lord Morskitar was well prepared for the great ritual that the Grey Seers were plotting to unleash. The Grey Seers visited every Skaven stronghold up and down the Underway, and gave a single ultimatum: be at the annual feast of Vermintide, or suffer the wrath of the great horned rat. The Grey Seers knew that this pitiful war must end, otherwise the dreams of world domination that the Horned Rat has both gifted and demanded from his children would never be fulfilled. And so, the Grey Seers were to invoke a spell that would bring the Under Empire to its knees in servitude towards the one true ruler of all Skavendom. Soon, entire clans made their way towards the great ceremony, while others, fearful of a trap, sent representatives of their clan to the gathering. But none dared to stay away altogether, for fear of their merciless god's wrath. For only the second time in their entire history, a member of each clan gathered at the footsteps of the Temple of the Great Horned Rat to bear witness to the great ritual that was being performed. An atmosphere of fearful expectation could be smelt upon the assembled masses as the temple doors swung open and the full order of 169 Grey Seers filed out. Seer Lord Kritislik was the last of the 13 13s to step out, and with him carried a skin-bound book, from which he set upon an iron altar. As he spoke, leading the incantation, the very air seemed to twist, and a distant, ominous crackling could be heard as the grand ritual began to take shape. The Grey Seers picked up the chant and amplified their lord's voice. The intensity rose as they began the sacrifices. One by one, 169 slaves died in increasing agony, with the last one dying to the torments of the Seer Lord himself. Their squeals of fear and pain reached out through the very bowels of creation, where the Horned Rat gnawed at the roots of reason. The great bell tolled as the brooding skies began to darken, and chains of lightning lashed out to illuminate the dreadful scene. Again and again rang the unholy bell, so impossibly loud that it drowned out the sounds of chanting and thunder alike. At the 13th toll, the bell stopped, and an eerie silence filled the whole city. In the sudden silence, the Great Seer Lord opened his jaw and screeched as a massive cloud of vapor rose up and engulfed the very sky in its darkness. A titanic claw reached out from the void and ripped apart the very curtains of reality. And there he sat, with skin blacker than black, and two blood-red eyes as wide as castle gates. The great horned one stared out into the teeming masses of his own children. All in that city knew who they were staring at, and all knew that they are nothing but servants to their one and true ruler. As one, the Skaven hordes fell prostrated, pressing their muzzles hard onto the cool stone, with some dropping dead from the dreadful sight. It was then that the titanic hand once more ripped through reality and reached out and scooped picked up a score of squealing SKAVEN. As his hand retreated, a score of massive yellow-fanged teeth flashed in the dark gloom as the great horned rat consumed them whole. After his feast, the Horned One gazed out over his quailing children and reached out again and again. It was only after his final feasting that he withdrew his paw and revealed to his children a gift. There, standing at the very center of the hordes, laid a glowing pillar of the purest warpstone, with 13 sides, each marked by 13 blocks of glowing runes. These runes contained the unholy, verminous commandments of ruination and the dictates of rulership, along with prophecies of the Great Ascendancy. Then, their Lord and God whispered to the assembled horde with a voice of 1,000,000 scratching and gnawing rats. His dreaded voice spoke and told them that their pitiful wars amused him greatly, but that this quarreling must cease. He demanded that the SKAVEN must spread his corruption in order for the SKAVEN race to inherit the world and ensure his full return. He demanded the reformation of the Council of 13 and swore that all must obey their commands or feel his eternal wrath. Only his favored could touch the sacred pillar, and thus only the chosen ones could join the Great Council. With his final commandments, the Horned One retreated back to the Netherworld, with the crack within the fabric of reality narrowing and sealing behind him, until finally all was silent. Their god was gone, and the horde stood silent and fearful. The mask of fear hung heavy over the survivors as they blinked at the black pillar and reassured themselves that the Great Horned One had really been there and was really gone. Fear still gripped the teeming masses as they stared at the unholy sight. But to each of the Lords of Skavenblight, they knew that they had to touch the pillar in order for their ascendancy towards the Council to be assured. Lord Rakeen was the first to touch the pillar. He burned with black fire until his corpse collapsed and only ashes remained. Over the long night, each Skaven lord and chieftain strode to the unholy pillar and placed their paw upon the warp-encrusted stone. Many did not survive, as a multitude of the Rat Lords burned with unholy fire as the Horned One denied them as his chosen. Only 12 lived, with each of the Lords of Decay being imbued with an aura of dark, magical energy, truly the blessing bestowed by the Horned Rat himself. From that day forward, the Council has remained unchanged. Many Skaven have touched the pillar and died. Some have survived, but none have the skill and courage to defeat the first chosen of the Horned Rat. And so it came to pass that the Skaven were once more united under the rulership of the 13, with Kritislik at the head. When thinking of SKAVEN magic, the first thing most think of is the Grey Seers, a perverse blend of arcane sorcery with divine inspiration. Grey Seers are powerful and unpredictable in their black arts. But magic is deeply invested in SKAVEN society, and the Grey Seers are not the only ones who have some degree of mastery of sorcery. The Plague Priests and Deacons have developed their own breed of horrid spells, while the Warlock Engineers learn to draw the warp energy contained within Warpstone and channel it into their perverse arcane devices. What follows is a survey of the types of magic employed by the SKAVEN. To the SKAVEN, all magic originates from the Horned Rat. From the terrible sorcery of the Grey Seers to the pestilential machinations of the Plague Priests, it all comes from the same source, their powerful and fickle god. Dogma aside, the truth is that SKAVEN magic still involves the manipulation of the arcane energies blowing south from the turbulent polar region beyond the Chaos Wastes. And without this energy, not even the most devout and cunning SKAVEN could weave the simplest spell. SKAVEN use Dahar, or dark magic, much like the thrall wizards of Tzeentch, necromancers, black magisters, and witches. SKAVEN differ from these casters, however, in the product and focus of their black arts. Though other variations may exist, there are 3 fundamental types of SKAVEN magic, each organized into a separate lore: plague, stealth, and warp. A rare few SKAVEN dabble in necromancy, and fewer still abandon the ways of their people to embrace another chaos god. Such instances almost always result with the disintegration of the offending SKAVEN. As with all dark laws, casting spells using Dahar carries great risk of developing unwanted or unexpected side effects. As well, SKAVEN spellcasters use Warpstone heavily in their spells, which not only creates greater risk of mishaps, but also takes its toll on their bodies. Knowledge of these spells is taught from master to apprentice, and is carefully protected amidst the ambition and treachery prevalent among all SKAVEN. Though a master might teach the rudiments of raw magic, he does so grudgingly, as his student must eventually contest his power and perhaps even try to overthrow him. Thus, SKAVEN mentors are careful to instill fear and respect in their apprentices and to play favorites, always working to pit one student against another to distract these treacherous pupils from betraying their master. First up, the lore of the plague. The lore of the plague is a foul magical technique. The Plague Priests of Clan Pestilence use this magic, which is the product of generations of isolation in Lustria, to cow the clan rats and other SKAVEN who swear allegiance to their warlord. Specializing in matters of disease and decay, this lore is repellent and thoroughly evil, designed to spread sorrow and death in enemies. Each mortal who succumbs to the ravages of these spells exalts the power and majesty of the Horned Rat in his plague-bringer aspect. As the Plague Priest grows more powerful, he finds his body ravaged by the magic he employs. Commonly, this results in rotting extremities akin to those suffered by lepers, infestations of maggots and mites, and a general collapse of the spellcaster's body. While powerful, the lore of plague brings its practitioners death with it. Second, the lore of stealth. Learn from the Cathayan sorcerers of the distant east. The lore of stealth is used by the ever-rare Eshin sorcerers. These spells are designed to augment the stealth, speed, and strength of the clan's attack forces, and none are quite sure whether Clan Eshin SKAVEN's legendary skills have ever been completely mundane. Clan Eshin guards the secrets of this art to ensure that none of the rival clans learn the answer. And thirdly, the lore of Warp. The province of the terrible Grey Seers. The lore of Warp allows SKAVEN to dabble in the domains of plague and stealth, as well as to harness the power of Warp energy itself. The older and more practiced the practitioners of Warp lore become, the longer their horns grow, and often the greater their dependence on Warpstone. And now follows a list of all the known SKAVEN spells. First up, the petty spells. Favor. Gain skill or steal it from another SKAVEN's own favor given by the Horned Rat. The Ghostly Flame. You conjure a small blob of glowing green fire out of thin air. It drips vicious fluid as it burns, and can be thrown at a foe. Otherwise, this petty spell generates light equivalent to a torch, and remains for 1 hour before sputtering out. The Mark of the Horned Rat. A target creature gains an unsightly blemish, taking the form of an open, weeping sore on his forehead or the back of his hand. Grey Seers use this spell to mark their messengers. The Rat Thrall. You summon an ordinary brown rat. For a number of hours, you may communicate with the rat as if you shared a common language, and it must obey all of your commands, even if it would cause its own death to do so. Rat thralls can fetch small objects, gnaw through ropes, and other general tasks that an ordinary rat should be able to do. But such missions are limited by the rat's animal intelligence. Vector. Make a single target within 12 yards more susceptible to disease for 24 hours. Rack. You cause a single target within 12 yards to experience a jolt of searing pain. And now, the main spells. Air of Pestilence. The caster hacks out a cloud that magically spreads and befilths a wide area. All who breathe in its pestilent airs seem to shrivel and weaken, their bodies sagging. The Armor of Darkness. You solidify the shadows around your body, in addition to making you harder to see in low light conditions. This shadow armor also protects you from harm. You cannot use this spell while wearing normal armor, and it loses its effects if armor is donned. The Avatar of the Horned Rat. There are stories of grey seers with huge horns who leap into the midst of battles and skewer their enemies. This spell may be the source of those stories. On casting, huge horns sprout from the seer's head, and his body grows in size by roughly half again the normal size. The spirit of the Horned Rat flows into him. The seer is lost in a mad frenzy and tears at all about him, friend or foe alike. Such distinctions no longer have any meaning for him. He also is immune to any psychological effects and will not stop until slain. The transformation places a strain on the SKAVEN's body that it is unable to sustain, and consequently, there is a steadily increasing chance that the SKAVEN's heart will burst. When this happens, the supernatural frenzy will keep the seer alive and fighting for a brief time, after which he collapses in a dead heap on the ground. The Black Whirlwind. You summon a putrid whirlwind of vile smoke and stinging ashes anywhere within 48 yards. Bless with Filth. A foul mist wraps around the weapons of a nearby unit, and the weapons begin to drip with toxic filth. Brittle Bone. One of the oldest SKAVEN spells. This allows a SKAVEN wizard to weaken the bones of an individual target. A hit to different areas of the body will cause different debilitating effects. Hitting the head will cause the victim to feel nauseous and suffer terrible headaches. If hit to the body, the victim finds it hard to breathe, their chest racked with pain. If hit to the arm, the joints in the victim's arm ache painfully when moved. If hit to the leg, the victim's leg is painful to walk upon, sending shooting pains up their spine. Buoyant Passage. You become as buoyant as a piece of balsa wood, allowing you to tread over liquid surfaces like water, sewage, or oil as if they were solid. The Black Hunger. A horrifically powerful spell which consumes the minds of all SKAVEN around the caster, drowning their intellect with an all-consuming need to feed. The Chittering. Most SKAVEN magic corrupts the body. This spell corrupts the mind. When cast, the seer spreads a web of insanity around him, warping the minds of all within 100 yards. Victims degenerate into a mindless horde, instinctively aiding all SKAVEN and the seer in particular. They gather around the caster to protect them, follow simple instructions, and attack anyone unaffected by the magic, using hands and teeth. Victims also lose the power of speech, communicating with gestures and the rat-like chittering noises that give this spell its name. The Cloud of Corruption. The caster releases a stinking blast of diseased fury. Curse of the Horned Rat. The dreaded 13th spell. With a sickening lurch, the fabric of reality is torn by the twisting power of the Great Horned One, turning opposition to clan rats. The Crackling Doom. You send a single, crackling arc of green energy at any opponent within 12 yards. The Crack's Call. With the arcane incantation invoked, the SKAVEN ends by stamping his horrible, pinkish, rat-like foot, causing the very ground to split asunder. Death Frenzy. Gesticulating wildly, the caster gifts a unit with a rapid and frothing urge to close and strike the foe. The Flensing Ruin. Green ribbons of warp energy tear the flesh from the target's bones. Gnaw. A gnaw spell is like unleashing a horde of invisible rats to attack a victim or structure. Its area of effect is only 1 square yard, but its ferocity is such that it continues to gnaw until the target structure is no more. The gnaw spell has many applications, but is often used for hole punching in gates, earthworks, or palisades during sieges. The Great Red Pox. The caster vomits forth a crimson mist that rapidly spreads across the battlefield, causing an instantaneous eruption of fist-sized boils and then a most painful death. The Howling Warp Gale. The caster gestures twitchingly to the skies, and fierce hurricane gales begin to build until it swirls around the entire battlefield. The Infecting Gaze. The spell infects one individual with the Black Plague. Infecting Gaze is perhaps one of the most underhanded SKAVEN spells. Victims rarely realize that they have had the spell cast upon them, and even once the plague takes hold, the victim may not realize that the cause is magical. Being magical, the disease will not spread beyond its intended victim, although it may well cause panic in urban areas. The Mantle of Contagion. You taint a blanket, cloak, or piece of clothing with a virulent strain of Kroots. The Musk of Terror. You summon a large cloud of demonic musk, forcing all creatures within to cower with terror. The Pelt of the Assassin. By calling upon the ever-changing chaos of the warp, you alter the structure of your fur so that it changes color to match your surroundings. The Pestilent Breath. Uttering horrible phrases, the SKAVEN sorcerer belches forth an impossibly foul cloud. The Pit of the Underworld. The caster strains his mind to open a great rent in the earth. The target's sight begins to shake, until the ground gives way to a vast pit that drops into blackness below. Plague. The caster unleashes a disease from the Book of Woe. Plague's source. Plague's source enchants a water source with the Black Plague. Springs, wells, and ale kegs are all common targets that SKAVEN sorcerers choose for this spell. The poisonous pustule. You create a pulsing, seeping pustule on one of your extremities. When lanced and drained, the pus from this weeping sore can be spread onto a hand weapon. If a weapon coated with this toxic secretion wounds, it additionally deals more wounds depending on how strong the caster is with magic. Putrefy. With a flourish and a curse, you cause an amount of food to rot and decay, rendering it totally inedible. This spell is used with great effect to induce famine in surface populations. Any creature that eats the infected food is automatically infected with the Galloping Trots. Scourge. The SKAVEN sorcerer thrusts his paws into the ground while chittering fiery incantations, causing a gout of flame to burst forth. Screech. This spell lets a Grey Seer call to other SKAVEN over long distances. To cast, the Rat Man throws back his head and stretches his vocal cords to emit a high-pitched scream that carries half a mile per level of the seer, especially to the sensitive ears of the SKAVEN. The screech is just a call and carries no information, though the tone can convey an emotion such as desperation, anger, or eagerness. The Shadow's Companion. With this spell, a SKAVEN sorcerer can melt into the darkness simply by stepping into a shadow. Shriveled Tongue. This spell is intended as a countermeasure against other wizards. It shrivels the victim's tongue so that speech of any kind, such as incantations, is made impossible. Skitter Leap. The SKAVEN disappears in a puff of smoke to appear elsewhere on the battlefield. Sticky Paws. You grant yourself the ability to walk or crawl upon walls and ceilings as fast as you could run on the flat ground. Objects you carry or wear are still affected by gravity in a normal fashion and fall to the ground if dropped. Swift Scamper. You grant yourself the ability to move at an increased rate. The Toxic Rain. Calling upon the power of the Horned Rat, you conjure a poisonous cloud that drifts above a dozen feet above the ground, up to 36 yards away. Soon after casting, the cloud rains a lethal poison upon all characters within the affected area, causing those affected to fall into a nightmare-filled slumber. The Traceless Demise. The body of any creature that dies while under the effects of this spell melts away into a foul-smelling black slime. Traceless Demise is commonly cast upon the assassins of Clan Eshin before they embark on a hunt, ensuring that no SKAVEN corpses are left behind. The Veil of Flies. With a curse and a flailing of your arms, You summon a cloud of gnats or biting flies. They swarm about you, biting and stinging your enemies. The Verminous Ruin. The caster summons a living tide of voracious rats that scurry forth and carve a swath of ruin across the battlefield. Vermintide. The caster invokes, and many rats answer the call. Warp Lightning. The SKAVEN points a fleshy paw and bolts of greenish black lightning arc outward. The Warp Stars. You conjure up a number of poisoned warp stars and fling them at one or more opponents within 36 yards. The Warp Storm. You summon a storm anywhere within 48 yards, which angrily discharges greenish black bolts of warp lightning. This storm is formed of pure warp energy, fueled by the malignant power of the horned rat, and may appear in any locale, even underground. The Weeping World soars. At the Plague Priest's wretched word, the world itself begins to bubble and boil with toxic pus. The Weeping Wounds. You cause an enemy's wounds to become horribly infected. And, at last, Wither. Chanting passages from the Liber Bubonicus, the wizard casts a spell of wasting, shrinking sickness.